Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's version of Michigan Innovation Podcast. And we are so lucky to have Delaney Keating with us from 20 Fathoms. How are you doing today, Delaney?
I'm good, Rose. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for joining me today. And I just have to say, she's one of the new stars in Traverse City, came in to help really lead a lot of what's going on at 20 Fathoms, and we're going to get into that today. But before we do that, what I want to do is to give Delaney a minute to tell us a little bit about her background and where she's from and how did you end up in Traverse City?
All good questions. Thanks, Rose.
Mhm.
Well, I'm one of those whose life path is a bit winding at times, but it all seems to make sense when you look backwards, right? So I'm actually a Colorado native, and I just moved to Michigan this summer. Um, I actually started moving to Michigan last February full time. I came to Michigan just over a year ago for my first time and fell in love with it immediately. And that's how I came to find 20 Fathoms. Is when I got to Traverse City, coming from my background in startup culture and startup support in Colorado, I was wandering around Traverse City, and to say you could smell something was going on, I was able to sniff out there's something nascent happening in Traverse City around startups. So I got online and I Googled startups Traverse City, and that's when I found 20 Fathoms and Eric Roberts, who was our former executive director at 20 Fathoms, and just reached out to offer to coach startups or be of support while I was in town. Because I wanted to be present and to give back. I know what it takes to create these kinds of economies when they're tourist economies, and sort of playing the role of the stewards of paradise. So wanted to give back while I was here. That's when I met Eric Roberts, and that's where things pivot quickly. And I end up with a job at 20 Fathoms a few months later. So I came on at 20 Fathoms April 1st. Um, and it's a cool moment. I get to bring with me a background of doing this work in Colorado, but also with an entirely new lens, because I don't assume that anything is ever the same, especially when we're doing place-based work, like community building or building startup culture in a new place. So I do come to the work with an extensive background of building systems and culture and education for innovation, both in remote places in Colorado and then also in service to all of rural Colorado. So it was a cool moment to join 20 Fathoms as 20 Fathoms expanded its service into supporting all of Northwestern Lower Michigan. I think I got that right. Did I say it right?
You did. It was perfect, perfect.
Still understanding the nuanced geography. I don't know how to do the hand signal yet. I don't know where I live on this, but I know I'll get it.
You'll get it. You'll get it. Well, what you mentioned something that I've heard you say before because I've seen you present and do such an awesome job of representing 20 Fathoms. But you mentioned stewards of paradise.
Mhm.
And I thought that just made me think, it really opened up my mind to what we do and how
Mhm.
what you were a steward to paradise in Colorado. Everyone knows how beautiful Colorado is. And thank you, John Denver, for putting Colorado basically on the map in the 70s for the
Right.
rest of the United States. But what is the steward of paradise mean to you?
Yeah, you know, similar to Colorado in the mountains, right? So I spent almost 30 years in a small town in the mountains called Gunnison, Colorado. So um, it's, 7,000 people at 8,000 feet, an isolated mountain village surrounded by ski areas and mountain passes, and beautiful open land and natural resources. And so when I talk about the stewards of paradise, it's those communities and populations and people who live there, who choose those places. A lot of these communities, when you choose these more remote places or places connected to natural resources, it's an intentional choice. You're generally choosing to live there. You're not necessarily there by happenstance or circumstance. That can happen over generations for sure. But the other part of being a steward of paradise is that, you know, these tourist economies, and it sounds a bit harsh, but they're certainly kind of built on the backs of the people who live there.
Mm.
Tourism jobs, tourism industry, and that's not to say that people aren't making decent money throughout, but some of it is a bit challenging, and we know that.
Well, yeah, it's seasonal too.
Right.
We had really bad winter last winter, and everyone really hurt
Yeah.
because of that
So it's
winter.
seasonal. Sometimes the wages aren't as high, or you don't have as diverse of an economy. You end up with, the challenges that we're seeing in communities around housing because of rental markets or second home ownership. There are different pressure points, and part of the challenge too, when I look at being the stewards of paradise, is that we are we're in the business of creating space and experiences for people.
Mm,
And there's some money to be made there, and there's taxes to be made there. The difference being, for example, if you went to Disney, you pay a ticket price,
mm-hmm,
right? Well, we don't charge a ticket price for
mm,
entry. And we wouldn't want to, because we believe in access
mm,
to the open land.
right.
So part of being a steward of paradise is care for the natural resource, and then conversely, looking at how do you start to use different levers to diversify your economy when you aren't necessarily, when it doesn't entirely pay its way. Is that fair?
That
It doesn't
makes
pay its
sense.
way.
That really makes sense. And I really appreciate that you went into that. And what a rich, rich history. And I'm so happy. Now, you didn't move to Traverse City. You live in Manistee, right?
Yes, yep. It's been baked into me at this point. I'm a small town girl, so I told 20 Fathoms I'd come work for them. I love Traverse City; it's amazing, but then I wanted to live in Manistee. But Manistee is also in our service area, and I love a lot of the puzzle pieces and things that I see that are possible in Manistee.
I
As we
just
look at the
think
work.
that really resonates with, we're from Cadillac, the Michigan
Yeah.
Innovation Podcast is not in Traverse City, although we, use the airport. I love the university, but we are our own community as well
Mhm.
as Manistee is. And so it's so cool that you live in Manistee, you work out of Traverse City, and that's a perfect segue into this whole thing called 20 Fathoms. I went to a a class there a couple weeks ago, and a very good question came out. What is a 20 fathoms? And
Exactly.
so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what is 20 fathoms? How long has it been around? Why is it called 20
I know,
fathoms?
yeah.
And all that.
We get that one a lot. It should almost just be at the top of the website. So a fathom is a measurement. So it's 20 fathoms deep in Grand Traverse Bay. That's what a
Awesome. I
fathom
love
is.
that.
Yep. So that is what a 20 fathoms is. Technically, it's a measurement of depth.
So is it a metaphor for the depth of opportunity?
Oh, maybe. I don't know. We'd have to ask the the OGs,
Because
but
I knew I had heard that it's the depth of the bay, but why did you name, I mean, you
yeah.
could probably go down that rabbit hole, but I was thinking must be the depth of the opportunity in and around that
Yeah,
tiny
and maybe just a
region.
unique marker for, I think 20 Fathoms, at its point of inception, um, and when it started was, about being a co-working space and a tech hub for the area. So I think it's always had 20 Fathoms comes to life, interest in supporting what's possible in the Grand Traverse region, specifically there in Traverse City when it started. So it probably just gave it a nice coordinate to relate to
Yeah,
that
makes
stated that it,
sense.
it cares about geography.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And so, what are you guys up to nowadays?
20 Fathoms, we've been busy. So the team has grown from 4 to 15 in the last year.
Wow.
Yep. Major expansion. So went from being a fairly small organization to really looking at a couple of opportunities. One, so of moving a couple of grants. So the organization expanded to serve a state grant and a federal grant simultaneously, and that's a lot of what funds that expansion. And that's allowing us to do a couple things. It's allowing 20 Fathoms to expand to serve the 10 county region and to really add an immense amount of depth and breadth to its service. So maybe we're getting closer to 20 Fathoms deep, but
There you go.
we could probably find 20 things to list at this
Oh,
point.
that'd be
Yeah,
very
really
clever.
interesting. Yeah. So with that, we've spent some time studying the landscape of startups and innovation, considering what it means for economic development in the region, and starting to pair together new services and resources for entrepreneurs.
Mm.
So at this point, we serve all entrepreneurs and small businesses in the 10 county region in various ways, alongside partners, right? So there's a lot of people in the work. And so we're very careful not to be duplicative, but to be kind of our ethos is to be complementary and collaborative to the work that's happening here. So interested in expanding what it means to be a startup and to bring more of that, those really early nodes of education that help people think like a startup, right? To start to work your idea, whether that's a Main Street business, whether that's a major innovation, or anything in between. These fundamental building blocks are fun puzzle pieces to play with as you start to look at bringing your idea to life. So a lot of our work is tending to that. And that doesn't just mean education, that gets into different types of funding access, different types of workshops and events, lots of coaching and other resources that
Excellent. And you still do the co-working space.
and we are still a co-working
And
space.
where are you located? That co-working space
So
located?
that co-working space is right in Traverse City at the corner of the 72 and the 31. That's all I know how to tell you.
On the West Bay.
On the West Bay, top
Right.
floor of the Wells Fargo
It's
building.
such a beautiful building, and what a view. I
Yeah.
actually have a membership for 5 times a month, and what a deal. Whenever I'm in Traverse City and I'm in between meetings, I can go in and, or if I just need some time away and I want some out of the office time to think or meet with so many of my colleagues, I go there to meet, and it's a great, great facility. I really love it. I love going there. The coffee's great and the camaraderie is awesome too. So, wow, you guys are doing so many things. Did you say that you could help people do investments? You help people l- l- pretty much learn about how to start a startup. Uh, I know that you're very busy with the pitch competitions as well.
Yeah, we
Right.
also have, yep, so we do a lot of pitch training and coaching, and then we also have the TC Tech. The next one's coming up on November 19th, which will feature all women entrepreneurs.
Awesome.
And that's a beautiful event that we do. And teams come, so 4 teams apply for each TC New Tech and get to pitch, and one wins a $5,000 reward.
Awesome. That's really, really cool. So it sounds like a great place, and it is a great place. And so let's talk about innovation. This is the Michigan
Yeah.
Innovation Podcast. And so you've been in the innovation space out west, and now you've had some time here in the Midwest. And let's take it up a notch and let's just talk about what is innovation? What does it mean to, to you, to Michigan, whatever comes to mind? Because I think that you have a very interesting perspective on the whole concept of innovation.
Yeah, I come to innovation as a creative entrepreneur, actually. So my background, company I owned was in marketing and design. And so I come from the creative sector. And for me, all of it really is born in the simplest terms from that creative spark, right? And that's that thing that makes us sort of human as well, part of the human experience. People talk about their purpose and lots of things like that. And there's also the creative spark and the spark of an idea and what that, how exciting that becomes for somebody when they have that. And of course, there's different paths to innovation, right? There's creating something new, and sometimes there's also just seizing an opportunity that you see, right? So there's sort of a mix of those two paths into innovation. But it's really important work, and it's really human work. I think we can forget that when we get into think about it as business and business mechanics. But when somebody commits to bring an idea to life as a startup, that's a big commitment, and it's a big walk that you go on with yourself to do that. And it's a really, for this work, I think it's so important because it can catalyze a lot of energy that exists in a place. Michigan seems to have a real base of talented doers and an interesting history and no shortage of talent that lives here in terms of its history with manufacturing, engineering, and then everything that it has on the horizon of where it can go, right, with its other interests. And we're not going to talk about industries today. We'll stay broad, but I think innovation is such an important thing that can help bring a community resiliency,
Mm.
help communities, remind communities what's possible, and continue to create opportunity for people when we start to foster innovation. Does that make sense?
It really does.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I feel like it's cultural work that we do.
Mhm.
You know, it really is.
Yeah.
You know, initially. So yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And I know that when I think about innovation and my experience with innovation was really it started with me when I started working for IBM right out of college. IBM International Business Machines, worked with Henry Hollerith to create the first tabulating machine. And when I started working with IBM, there was a lot of reverence given to inventions and patents, and we called it research and development back in those days, and creating new things, and really the rigor that went behind vetting a new idea. We spent a lot of time, had tons and tons of ideas, but only very few made it to the manufacturing line. And so when I left IBM and started my own company and started to work in medical records and seeing the suffering that I saw with the uh, parents and the loved ones of people that had no access to medical records, and I knew the technology was there. I'd worked with document management, scanners, and that type of thing. And I knew that we just needed to bring these disparate technologies together and then provide security through innovative, security methods. And we could deliver an electronic medical record. And what really drove my innovative spark was just wanting to deliver medical information to doctors in real time, whether it was in the emergency room or reading a lab report instantaneously rather than waiting for a week to get a lab report to a doctor so he could or she could make a determination, or electronically signing a document so that it would be valid and that they could take it to the next level. And then we moved into e-prescribing, and so much innovation has happened in healthcare. And I've seen firsthand lives being saved by innovation. And so I'm passionate about innovation because I've seen how it can improve the quality of life, alleviate suffering, and really, really help. And on the other side, as an entrepreneur and as an innovator, it is so rewarding to be able to create something brand new. And and a lot of times we're teaching people. When you create a new concept that's really changing the way people do work, you're educating. And so it brings out the whole education and methodology changes. And sometimes, people come kicking and screaming through it. A lot of doctors and nurses were not excited about the innovation. And even to this day, we have trouble. There's hacks and people's medical information is no longer available. But really and regarding Michigan, when I think about Michigan's innovation, I know we've gone through a few iterations. Early days, we were lumbermen. And when I look at my own degree from Michigan State, I'm a packaging engineer, and it came out of the engineering school, but into the natural resources, because packaging engineering came from the forestry service. Boxes were made out of corrugated, and over in Manistee, we have Packaging Corporation of America still, which is a huge landowner on that side of the state. So when you think about Michigan and the changes we've experienced, we've had the forestry experience, and then we had the Civilian Conservation Corps that planted all the trees in the rows during the Depression. And then, of course, we had the whole automotive wave with Henry Ford and the big three automakers in Detroit. And so Michigan has been a hub for innovation through the century and a half that Michigan has been around. And now I'm just so excited to see places like 20 Fathoms that are really embracing the next wave and helping the next wave of innovators. So that's
Yeah.
kind of my perspective.
No, I love that. And it, I want to turn this on you and ask you a question.
Oh, okay.
Because there's such a cool part of that story, right? Like you're part of the story, which is how did this young woman from Cadillac end up becoming a packaging engineer and working for IBM?
Okay, well, that was an interesting, that, we all
Because
take little
there's
winding
some incredible,
around.
yeah, there's like Michigan, I've just met really incredibly intelligent people here, and that's not to say like I'm surprised. I believe the same thing about Colorado. I just think in the rural context, it's so important for us to highlight those things, because I do think from the outside perspective, people expect that, the big minds are in the cities, and really we know that's not true. But
Right.
but so curious how, what was your family into, and how did you end up on
Oh,
that
well,
track?
thank you. That's my mother and my father worked for, prior to, in the old days, my mom and dad's grandparents were cooks in the lumber camps. And so we basically they were cooks in the lumber camps here in Cadillac. And in about 1910, they left and went out to Canada, to Isle Royal, to be cooks in the lumber camps out there. Well, my grandfather was up on the roof trying to get the chimney unstuck of coal, or something was stuck in it, and he fell off the roof and broke both of his legs. So they ended up back into Cadillac, and came back to Cadillac, and that's where they had their 5 boys, and all 5 went to World War II, and they all came home. But after World War II, there were no jobs in northern Michigan, and all the jobs were downstate in the Flint area and Detroit area. So all the boys went down to, after the war, they went down to the cities and worked for the automotive companies. But the longing for home never left them. And so in the 70s, my parents started raising dogs. They raised Boston Terriers. And we showed Boston Terriers all over the Midwest and into Canada, and had a lot of success with champions, AKC champion Boston Terriers. And so they decided they were going to start a pet shop and grooming and tropical fish store here in Cadillac. And they did. And they did that in the 70s. And, being raised as with all these puppies and animals around, I definitely wanted to be a veterinarian. They said, and I loved animals. I was your typical little girl who just loved the kitties and the puppies and the horses, went horseback riding, loving all animals. And so I went to Michigan State to be a veterinarian.
No.
And and also lived and worked with a vet and his family for a year, had my arm this far up into a cow, castrated some goats, had a lot of really firsthand experience. I actually helped my doctor do open heart to get some heartworms out of a beautiful white shepherd one day. And it was before they had the electric breathing machine. So I had to like squeeze this ball that would put air in the lungs. And so and then I saw the heartworms come out, and they were wiggling like spaghetti. It was really gross. But with all of that, I decided, maybe I want to just have pets and go into something a little bit where I could dress up a little bit more. So I changed my major to packaging engineering because it just was so interesting to me. I just love the idea of the product needs to be packaged before it can get shipped. And what's the mechanics behind that? I learned about logistics, packaging. And then I was lucky enough to get hired by IBM as a packaging engineer. And my first year on the job, it was during the era when electrostatic discharge was a real problem. So they were shipping modules on printed circuit boards that were $50,000 a chip or a module. And a customer engineer would walk across the carpet at a client or across the floor that wasn't grounded and would have static discharge. And he or she would touch that module and blow it. And that was happening frequently in the 80s to IBM field replaceable, parts. And so we needed to come up with a solution. And as a packaging engineer, we were starting to really look at different methods to handle that. Well, there was a product called, it was carbon impregnated corrugated, which was basically cardboard with black carbon pumped into it, which would bleed off that charge. Like when you were a kid and your brother would come up and
Totally.
zap you. But if you had that carbon impregnated corrugated or black cardboard, it would just dissipate. But there was two problems. The other problem was the popcorn that you would put in to package it. That has static
charge. Totally.
So
does.
yeah, so we had to come up with a new kind of inside foam, if you will, to protect the part. And then so the story is that I have a patent on this unique blended combined packaging system with the foam on the inside, which is colored pink because it's got polystyrene with some fluid in it, so it wouldn't create a charge.
Yep.
And then so anyway, I ended up getting my own patent for IBM. I don't own that patent. IBM owns that patent. But it was an experience that was really, really cool, and I really enjoyed it. But it wouldn't have happened if it weren't that we in Michigan have this packaging engineering school that's all based on forestry.
Oh, that's so right. So there comes the forestry piece,
right?
Full circle, and the natural resources.
Exactly.
And how they all made something.
Exactly.
That's really beautiful. Thanks for sharing that.
I know, maybe I went down the rabbit hole a little too far.
I love it. And I love too that you called out that you wanted to dress up more, because I always, I certainly know your style. Rose has her style.
Well, it was really hard, castrating those goats and putting my hands up those poor cows. It's just not my style.
I know. And you do like Rose always shows up dressed up. You do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So what made you, and I know we talked about that I was going to turn this interview on you a little bit, but it's such a blessing for me to be able to learn, but also to share with the audience, like this history around, what inspired you to start this Michigan Innovation podcast?
Well, because so much is going on in the state right now. There is so many things happening in northern Michigan, in the 3 counties around Detroit. I'm hearing about so much innovation in Grand Rapids, where we have so much in the furniture manufacturing, and they continue to innovate. And it's just so much going on. And in the city of Cadillac, we have so much happening. And so I thought we needed a voice to really trumpet that Michigan is here. It's been here for a century and a half doing amazing things. And this isn't just the Rust Belt. There's a heck of a lot more going on in Michigan than to be called the Rust Belt. When I've traveled a lot in my experiences, and every time I would hear someone say that, I was certainly offended because there's so much going on here. So we've got to really have a platform to talk about those innovative ideas and businesses.
Yeah, storytelling is such an important part of the work, especially from rural perspectives, to help change the narrative as we all continue to work to bridge the rural-urban divide. It's unintentional. It's just part of it. When you're further out in places. You, of course, champion all of Michigan on your podcast, but coming from Cadillac and watching what's possible in these regions. And that storytelling is important. It reminds us of who we are as people, what we've been capable of, what we're capable of in the future, and what we're capable of today. And championing those people who are doing the real work of bringing an innovation to life. And, what's cool in a place like Michigan, too, when you get into the work, is the span of innovation, right? So when I think about it, it's, there are people who are designing apps and solutions to empower local economies, right? And smaller rural local economies. And then there's, Michigan has at least in northern Michigan, my experience currently is there's incredible food producers and there's some food innovation there. So that's really interesting,
That
right?
really is. When
Right.
you look at the whole agritourism,
Mhm.
it's amazing. If you and we live right here, and you may drive by these farms and they may have a sign out front that they have cider or this or that. But if you do a deep dive on what they're doing in these local vineyards,
Yeah.
oh, there's so much going on in the whole area of agritourism. It's
Yeah,
just,
food, agritourism, even, the potential for products to increase in scale, right? So that's interesting. All the way, up to what you're talking about. Then there's packaging, then there's people solving for environmental problems, then there's, really high-tech solutions, and we have things coming to the table, whether that's in blue technology, freshwater technology,
oh,
healthcare technology.
that's right.
All the engineering that's happening. There does seem to be a strong engineering base and sort of
Yes.
mindset that comes out of Michigan. And I think there's something important that we'll learn over time in this work, that is those of us who lived for a long time or were raised at a certain point in our lives outside the beaten path, called the urban corridor. I think you ask more questions of the world sometimes.
Right.
When you grow up with a little bit more space, there's just a perspective shift that happens that I think creates a unique problem
I
solver
think
in the
that's
world.
very interesting.
Probably because sometimes we have to solve problems, right? When you don't have things, you have to go.
Oh, you have to be
Well,
resourceful.
and you might appreciate this. One of my things that I learned from my time doing this work in rural context in Colorado is I was driving around, and one thing you can always find in a small town is a hardware store. I like to say an Ace hardware store.
Oh, right.
It's like those are the first incubators.
Yes.
There's your first,
Yes.
maker space. Like,
That's
where do you
right.
go to solve problems? The
Right.
hardware store.
Right. And
But
you ask questions and they give you
yeah,
solutions.
and especially if you've been living, quote unquote, farther off the beaten path, you're going to the hardware store. They probably don't have what you need, and you're going to try to make something work. So you're
Right.
just constantly learning to be resilient and adapt to make work
And your problem
something work.
solving.
Yeah, in a
Yes.
new, different way. So I think those are things that we can champion in
Oh,
the
that's
space.
a very cool
Yeah,
perspective.
yeah.
Very, very interesting. Yes. Yeah. Well, when you are, and also there's the people in Michigan are unique in that they are problem solvers and they're very supportive. Say what you will, but we've got a special temperament, the people that live in and occupy this part of the world. And so I think that's special as well. Very
Yeah.
special.
Yeah.
Very special. Well, it's so cool. What I know that 20 Fathoms has so many things coming in the next. We talked about the pitch competition. I want to go back to that just for a minute because that is such an amazing event, and it's at the Opera House in. It's called the Opera House, right? In
I believe there's a former full name, but I also
Yes,
know it as the Opera House.
right. It's right down there on Front Street in Traverse
Yes,
City.
Traverse City Opera House.
It
or
starts at
something.
4:30-ish or 5 on the 19th of November, and it happens frequently. So if you miss that date, keep an eye on that space because it comes up. But talk about innovation. I have seen some of the most innovating, thought-provoking products and companies that come, and some of them are local, some come from Muskegon, some come from U of M, some come from Michigan State, some come right from Traverse City.
Yep.
But I have to tell you, if you want to see up close and personal the founders, the innovators, the people that have the passion, I'll never forget Miss Childs from U of M, who is creating a special gut for uh, doing medical or pharmaceutical trials. I was super impressed with her. I was super impressed with the Vetter Health.
Oh, yeah.
So impressed with some of the gamification and advertising. I mean, they're coming in from all different industries. And so I just love that. And Maria does such a great job at that. So what else is happening? I know there's so many things happening. I know that you've got some unique things because I have to say that the whole calendar at 20 Fathoms is really fuller than I've ever seen it before. Thanks,
Oh, yeah.
Delaney.
Well, yeah, and the team, right? So that expansion. So 20 Fathoms is a breadth of things. There's, of course, the co-working space. So
Yep.
people come, enjoy working there. We now have a scholarship that we run to support an
Oh, I didn't know
entrepreneur
that.
with a dedicated desk for a period of time. So that's kicking off. Excited to do that to help make access to the space more accessible. We're constantly working on accessibility. A really amazing thing that we just completed that'll come again in the future is we ran our first Indigenous Business Marketing Essentials program, and that filled up with a waiting list. And it was an
Wow.
incredible program. Yep, and that's run by Shiloh Slomsky. She's our tribal liaison. So that went amazing. We're really being as responsive to um, our client, our customer, right, the entrepreneur as we can and in doing so in real time. So workshops that have happened recently, we did a pitch prep workshop to help people formulate pitches, whether that's to go forth for investment or competitions. You can need pitch decks for lots of things, right? You can need a pitch deck to communicate to your employees in an existing business. You can a pitch deck to help sell what you're selling to your customers. There's lots of value that comes from that.
Yeah, and I'm creating one for my advisory board that I'm building. And it's invaluable because you look from the inside, it's hard to see it as an outsider would see it just because you're not that outsider. And I know I went through the process and it was invaluable because it really gave me so much good feedback on how to really tailor the pitch so that a person that has no idea
Yep.
of what you're doing or they don't have your idea and but to get them on board.
Yeah, and getting those, we all need help cleaning up our language and getting more succinct with what we're talking about. We think we're being clear and we're probably not, right?
Right.
So similar to me trying to talk about 20 Fathoms right now, and I'm like, here's the menu of 1,000 things. We have a great website for all of that. But to my point being that we're really listening. So I just want people to know that when we launched the Pitch Prep program or a recent, thinking about how to network your startup and build community around your idea, we launched some of those programs because we ran a survey and asked entrepreneurs what they wanted, and that's what they told us.
Mm.
So those kinds of things are happening because we're trying to really listen in a deeper way. We're also getting ready to launch startup boot camps.
Mm.
Those are really exciting. We'll be running those about 8 times a year. So really making accessible these fundamentals of taking your idea sort of to the table and really looking at it and playing with the parts and how you canvas that idea. So those will happen. We have one that starts tomorrow night in Traverse City. Again, that filled up with a wait list. And then we have another one that starts at the end of the month, October 28th, in Manistee. So we'll be exporting those as well. So there'll be 4 in Traverse City and 4 exported around the region.
Fantastic.
Yep.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
And so it's a 4 sessions.
Yep. The way we're running the boot camps is 4 modules over 2 weeks, and we're testing them at different times. We're trying to make them accessible to people where it doesn't require full days, assuming that they still have other work, part-time or full-time work, other work, kids, things like that. We want to try to figure out how to make it work for people. So we'll continue to learn, again, listening to the customer, what works for them. So we'll start to, every time we do something, we're designing and iterating. One of our big things at 20 Fathoms is we are a startup for startups. So we're constantly thinking like a startup. We've got to test our assumptions in the same way we're telling entrepreneurs to. We've got to go run customer discovery the same way we're telling our entrepreneurs to the best of our ability. So everything we do, debrief, look at it, iterate.
How fun. I bet you're enjoying that.
Super fun. Really excited to start teaching because it's been a lot of foundation laying, and you know how good it feels when you start just working.
Absolutely. When you finally start seeing you're out there and
but we have a whole team that does a lot of, I think of as like concierge work for entrepreneurs. So everybody who comes to 20 Fathoms fills out an intake form and goes through an intake process where we have a team that really triages around each entrepreneur to look at what services do we have that they need? Where can we best connect them into the ecosystem for things that we don't have that they need or other things they need? and help guide them forward and coach them where to go next. So it's sort
Wow.
of traffic control. And then, a lot of them end up too working with us in our coaching. So we provide a lot of one-to-one coaching. And to your point around self-reflection, when you're doing this work, it's isolating, get caught in your own rabbit holes. And so the coaching aspect is something we've put quite a bit of allocation of our time toward, because just having someone to sit and reflect with, troubleshoot, problem solve, overcome obstacles, stay focused, be strategic. Someone who can help there sit and talk to you so that you get back out in the field as quick as possible.
I think that's really, really critical to anyone, especially solopreneurs that are just starting.
So many of them are.
Yeah, and
totally.
so those solopreneurs that are all alone and they can come here and
Yeah.
thank God you got those grants from Michigan Economic Development and the feds, because we really are, and it sounds like you are using every penny you're stretching those pennies.
We're gonna do a good job distributing the benefit of those grants. Yep, with
Excellent,
reach.
excellent.
And that's our goal, is to make as much impact as
Well,
we can.
and early on in our conversation, Delaney, you brought up that you are part of the ecosystem of Traverse City, and that not only 20 Fathoms, there's other organizations. There's, Traverse Connect, there's OOPS, there's the college and all the things that they do for innovation. And so one of the things that I really love about your website is that it's so inclusive, and that you have now, you have the OOPS agendas, the OOPS out there. And so if you go to the website for 20 Fathoms, you'll not just see the 20 Fathoms stuff, if you will. You'll see more about other things that are happening in the ecosystem. And I feel that I go to these other meetings and there's always a representative from 20 Fathoms there. And it just feels so good to know that, we're all working together, whether it's the Michigan Innovation Podcast, 20 Fathoms, OOP, NMC, Traverse Connect. And I hope I haven't left anybody out, but we are all working together.
Yeah, it's a really busy time in the work. It's the early, it's kind of like the ecosystem in Michigan at large, and then even just looking at this 10-county region is sort of going from a very early stage into not necessarily a maturity yet, but a next stage. It's kind of it's like a teenager right now, right? It's starting to really move. So incredible partners. We all meet constantly. So not only when you work with organizations at 20 Fathoms, or we're working direct with entrepreneurs, we're constantly on the back end with our ecosystem partners, like the ones you mentioned. We also work with NLEA, which is the Northern Lakes Economic Alliance, if I got that right, Venture North, the Small Business Development Center.
Oh, that's so cool to know.
There's so many partners that come together, and in all the ways that we work community by community, and making sure that we're all adding value to each other and to the entrepreneurs. But yeah, it's a lot to get involved in, and everybody kind of has their own unique.
Right. They bring their own thing to the table. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, before we wrap this up, hey, thank you so much, Delaney, for joining me today. Do you have any compelling last words that you'd like to share with us?
Compelling last words. I don't know what I would say, Rose.
Well, I know what I would say, and I'm just so grateful that you're here.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you so much. And I think that it really, if you are looking at just an entertaining evening, go to the pitch competition. If you are a solopreneur or an entrepreneur or an innovator, take a look at the 20 Fathoms website and see what's happening in Northern Michigan, because there's a lot going on. And look at the 10 counties, because if you're coming in from the Northern Michigan's 10 counties that they cover, you're going to see events happening there too, like the one that is popping up next week in Maine State.
Well, and the thing I can close on saying is, even if you're not inside those immediate, character types of being an entrepreneur or an innovator, and this work is curious to you, or you're hungry to get involved, there's always lots of ways to get involved. So
excellent.
So we encourage anybody. It takes a lot of champions, or we always say, sort of in the startup industry, it takes a village to raise a startup.
That's so true. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And
thank
will you
you.
come back and see us in a year or so?
Yep.
All right. With that, we're going to say goodbye.
Perfect. I think that went well.
I do too.